It was the kind of autumn afternoon that settles into your bones. October in rural Maine. The sky a pale gray sheet stretched tight over barren fields. Jasper Callahan stood alone on his property, shovel in hand, breath misting in the cold air. He'd lived on this land for 15 years, knew every acre, every tree, every forgotten corner where the weeds grew thick and the soil turned stubborn. Or so he thought. He was digging near the old storage shed, nothing special, just clearing ground for a new garden bed, when the blade of his shovel struck something that wasn't stone, a hollow thud. Wood. Jasper paused, frowned, dropped to his knees and began scraping away the compacted earth with his bare hands. Decades of soil fell away in clumps, and there, half buried beneath tangled grass and thyme, was something that had no business being there. An iron ring, bolted to a wooden trapdoor. Jasper's breath caught. He sat back on his heels, heart hammering against his ribs. In 15 years of walking this property, cutting this grass, storing tools in that shed, he had never once suspected that anything lay beneath. The trapdoor was old, weathered to a grayish brown, the wood swollen from seasons of rain and frost. But the iron ring was still solid, still functional, still waiting. For a long moment, Jasper didn't move. Part of him wanted to cover it back up, pretend he'd never found it. But there was something else, something stronger that wouldn't let him walk away. He was, after all, an amateur historian. And this was a mystery. He gripped the iron ring with both hands and pulled. The trapdoor resisted at first, sealed by years of disuse. Then, with a groan that seemed to rise from the earth itself, it gave way. Below, darkness, absolute and complete. A rusted ladder descended into the void, its rungs disappearing into shadow. The air that rose from the opening was thick with mold, with stillness, with the unmistakable smell of a place that hadn't breathed in a very long time. Jasper retrieved a flashlight from the shed. His hands trembled slightly as he clicked it on. Then he descended. The ladder groaned beneath his weight. Each rung protested his presence, creaking like old bones. 10 feet down. 15. 20. When his boots finally touched solid ground, Jasper swept the flashlight beam across the space before him. It was a tunnel. Narrow, earthen walls reinforced with timber supports. The passage stretched forward into blackness, beyond the reach of his light. The construction was deliberate, professional. This wasn't some root cellar or forgotten well. Someone had built this. Someone had hidden it. And in 15 years of ownership, 15 years of property records, inspections, closing documents, not a single piece of paper had ever mentioned its existence. Jasper moved forward. The tunnel curved slightly, then widened. And there, at the end, illuminated in the pale circle of his flashlight, stood a door. Not a wooden door, a metal one. Heavy. Industrial. The kind of door you'd find in a bank vault or a military installation. He tried the handle. Locked. He pressed his shoulder against it. Nothing. Whatever secrets lay beyond that door, they weren't giving themselves up easily. Monica Callahan arrived home to find her husband standing in a hole in their backyard. She'd left work, early some vague unease she couldn't name, and pulled into the driveway to find the ground torn up, the trapdoor thrown open, and Jasper climbing out of the earth like a man who'd seen something he couldn't explain. "What is that?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. Jasper looked at her, looked back at the hole. "I have no idea." That night, they sat at the kitchen table with laptops open and documents spread between them. Property records, county archives, historical surveys. Nothing. The bunker, if that's what it was, didn't exist. Not on paper, not in any database, not in the memory of anyone they could find who'd lived in the area. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to keep this hidden," Monica said quietly. Jasper nodded. The question wasn't whether it was intentional. The question was why. It was Monica who found the first real lead. While Jasper had been examining the metal door more closely, she'd climbed down with a camera and photographed everything she could find. Timber supports, tool marks in the soil, and there, stamped into the frame of the vault door, a small manufacturer's plate. A company name, a logo, a serial number. The company was called Hartwell Construction. A quick search revealed it had gone out of business nearly a decade ago, but with enough digging disconnected phone numbers, defunct websites, archived business filings, Jasper finally reached someone who remembered. A man named Jonathan Hartwell, the former CEO. The phone call was brief. Jonathan was guarded at first, suspicious of a stranger asking about old projects. But when Jasper described what he'd found, the tunnel, the vault door, the total absence of any records, the old man's tone shifted. "Where did you say this was?" Jonathan asked. Jasper told him. A long pause. "I think I need to see this for myself." 3 days later, Jonathan Hartwell stood in Jasper and Monica's kitchen. He was in his 70s now, with deep lines carved into his face and eyes that had seen more than they would ever tell. His handshake was firm, his gaze unreadable. "My company specialized in discretion," he said, settling into a chair. "We built things for people who didn't want anyone to know they'd built them. Bunkers, safe rooms, underground vaults. Our clients paid a premium, and part of what they paid for was our silence." "So you built this?" Monica asked. Jonathan shook his head slowly. "I didn't build it myself, but my company did. Over 30 years ago." He paused. "For a man who scared even me a little." The client, Jonathan explained, had been a reclusive millionaire. No one knew exactly where his money came from: investments, inheritance, something else entirely. What everyone knew was that he valued privacy above all else. He'd purchased the property under a shell company, paid in cash, hired Hartwell Construction with a single, non-negotiable condition: no records, no permits, no paper trail. He wanted a place no one would ever find, Jonathan said. A place he could disappear into if the world fell apart. "And you built it for him?" Jasper asked. "I built it for him, and then I never heard from him again." That afternoon, the three of them stood before the vault door. Jonathan ran his hand along the metal frame, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. "We built this to last," he murmured. "Whatever's on the other side, it's been waiting a long time." It took 2 hours and a set of specialized tools Jonathan had brought with him, but eventually, the lock yielded. The vault doors swung open, and they stepped inside. The first thing Jasper noticed was the silence. Not just the absence of sound, but a kind of weight to the stillness. A sense that this space had been holding its breath for decades, waiting for someone to finally enter. The bunker was larger than he'd expected. Multiple rooms, branching off from a central corridor. The air was stale but surprisingly dry. Someone had engineered this place to preserve its contents, and there was so much to preserve. The first room they entered appeared to be a living quarters. A narrow bed, neatly made. A writing desk covered in dust. A bookshelf lined with volumes whose spines had faded to near illegibility. Clothing hung in an open wardrobe: suits, coats, shoes arranged with almost obsessive precision. This wasn't a bunker built for mere survival. Someone had lived here. Monica moved carefully through the space, photographing everything. On the desk, she found a stack of letters, still sealed. Beside them, a leather-bound journal. She opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was cramped, hurried. The entries dated back over 30 years. And as she began to read, her hand rose slowly to her mouth. "Jasper," she whispered, "you need to see this." His name was Edward Marlo. That much they pieced together from the journal, the letters, the photographs that lined one wall of the bunker's deepest room. A life captured in fragments. A man who had, by all evidence, erased himself from the world. But the why that took longer to understand. The journal told the story. Edward Marlo had been wealthy, yes. Successful, yes. But he had also been deeply, profoundly in love. Her name was Catherine. The photograph showed a woman with kind eyes and a soft smile. Wedding portraits, vacation snapshots, candid moments frozen in silver and shadow, and then, abruptly, the photographs stopped. The later journal entries were different. The handwriting shakier, the words heavier. Catherine had died. Suddenly, without warning. An illness that took her in months. And something in Edward Marlo had broken. The bunker wasn't built for nuclear war. It wasn't built for societal collapse. It was built for grief. After Catherine's death, Edward had retreated from everything, sold his businesses, severed his relationships, withdrew into silence, and then he built this place, a sanctuary, a tomb, a world where he could preserve the fragments of the life he'd lost and protect himself from ever losing anything again. The deeper they explored, the more they understood. The supply room held enough provisions to survive for years: canned food, water filtration, medical equipment. Gold bars and foreign currency lined one shelf, evidence of a man who'd prepared for every imaginable catastrophe. But beside those survival supplies sat something else entirely. Catherine's jewelry, her favorite books. A child's toy, their daughter's, perhaps, though no child appeared in any of the later photographs. Edward Marlo hadn't just been preparing to survive. He'd been preserving everything he couldn't bear to let go. The three of them stood in the bunker's deepest chamber. No one spoke for a long time. It was Jonathan who finally broke the silence. "I always wondered what happened to him," he said quietly. "After we finished the project, he just vanished. I assumed he'd moved away, started over somewhere." He looked around at the carefully preserved artifacts, the journals, the photographs of a woman who'd been dead for decades. He didn't start over. He just stopped. The legal questions were complicated. Who owned the contents of the bunker? Were there living relatives who might have a claim? What obligation did Jasper and Monica have to report the discovery? They consulted lawyers, historians, even reached out to distant branches of the Marlo family tree. What they learned only deepened the tragedy. Edward Marlo had died alone, his body discovered in a nursing home 3 states away. No funeral, no obituary, no one to claim his belongings. He had built a sanctuary to protect himself from loss, and in the end, he had been completely forgotten. Jasper and Monica made a decision. They would preserve the bunker, not as a tourist attraction or a historical curiosity, but as a memorial. The artifacts would remain where Edward had placed them. The journals would be archived and eventually donated to a local historical society. The photographs of Catherine would stay on the walls. Someone had lived an entire life defined by grief. And now, finally, that grief had been witnessed. When Jasper tells the story now, people always ask the same question. Was it worth it? All that preparation, all that hiding? He doesn't answer right away, because the truth is more complicated than a simple yes or no. Edward Marlo spent the second half of his life building walls. Walls of earth. Walls of metal. Walls of silence. He believed that if he could just control his environment completely, if he could just protect himself from every possible threat, he might survive the wounds that had already been inflicted. But grief doesn't work that way. You can't bury it deep enough to make it disappear. You can't lock it behind a vault door and expect it to stay contained. It doesn't matter how many supplies you stockpile or how carefully you preserve the past. The only way through grief is through it. Edward Marlo prepared for every disaster except the one that had already happened. He built a bunker to survive the end of the world, but his world had already ended the day Catherine died. And in trying to protect himself from ever feeling that pain again, he sealed himself away from everything that might have healed him. Connection. Community. The messy, unpredictable, beautiful chaos of being alive. The bunker is still there, beneath the farmhouse, beneath the autumn fields of rural Maine. Jasper visits it sometimes, sits in the quiet, reads a few pages of Edward's journal, not to understand the man completely, that's impossible, but to remember him. Because in the end, that's what we all want, isn't it? Not just to survive, but to be remembered, to be found. And sometimes that finding comes decades too late, after the person is gone, after the grief is calcified into architecture. But it still matters. It still counts. Because now, at least, someone knows.